Hey everybody, and welcome back to Part-Time Tabletopper. My name is Adam, and I've got a cool project for you guys this week. So I have been struggling for inspiration recently, and I'm in the middle of writing a new campaign for D&D, and in doing so, I wanted to try and use architecture and world building to help me kind of piece some things together. Now, when I was doing this, I kind of wanted to move away a little bit from the stereotypical fantasy that you see in D&D, like the Forgotten Realms stuff. A lot of like feudal and Renaissance style things, or maybe like Tolkien-esque things with the elven architecture. I wanted to do something different. And coincidentally, when I was doing this, a YouTube video recommendation reminded me of Final Fantasy. And I started looking at a lot of pictures specifically from Final Fantasy X, and I was really appreciating just how different a lot of that architecture was from your stereotypical fantasy settings. So what I did is, literally, you can't see it, but over on the other side of my basement, I had a shelf of some old junk, and I ended up taking something and turning it into a building. And I want to show you guys how I did that today. The final product ended up looking like this. I did record a video before I started this project to show you what this originally looked like, but in an effort to purge my phone and make room for data, I accidentally deleted that video. So instead, I'm going to show you this image right here. Now, without further ado, let me show you how I turned that into this. First, we're going to need some black primer. I have a traditional one here from the hardware store, as well as an acrylic one that's safe on foam, which we're going to hold on to for later. You're also going to need some hobby knives. In theory, if you have a couple blades, like a utility knife and a hobby knife, that's perfect, as well as some XPS foam, which you can see I've pre-cut here. So right off the bat, we're going to get a nice matte spray finish all over this entire thing, just because I thought having a black undercoat is a great way to start. Make sure you hold on to old cereal boxes and soda containers, because the chipboard that those are made out of comes in handy when you're trying to craft and make things up on the go like I am now. You can see that I'm tracing around a circle here, and then I'm going to freehand it into a little bit of an oval shape, just because I know it's going to go over the top of this. It's going to be my roof foundation. Again, nothing here is a perfect measurement, I'm just kind of making it up as I go. And honestly, that's the point of this entire build, just to show you that you can make things up as you go, take a piece of junk and turn anything you have lying around into a piece of cool terrain for your table. Now, I had a little trouble getting that to fit on, and then I realized I needed to cut around those handles, which is why you see those two little slits that I made there. Now, we're just going to hot glue it on. Now here's where I decided to put a little door on. I had a few of these lying around, and I'm not going to show you how to make these because there's a ton of tutorial videos on YouTube, but just know that you can make your own doors and put them on just like that with some glue. Then I took that XPS foam and cut it up into some tiny bricks. I textured it with some aluminum foil rolled up into a ball, and then glued it around the door just to make a door frame. Second half of the structure, we're going to need some tacky glue, and we're also going to need some air dry clay. After that, we're going to need some PVA glue, or some Elmer's school glue here, as well as some thick cut paper. I'm showing you normal paper here, but I actually used cardstock. Last, we're going to take a few dowels as well as a hot glue gun to complete the structure of this build. So I'm going to use this air dry clay with the disclaimer that I do not work with clay. So this is a ignore what you see and just do what I say and not as I do. Ignore the cardboard with the clay on there. Ultimately though, I put some glue down on the structure and then put some air dry clay all around the exterior because I wanted to have something that I could use as an imprint. It would have been fine just like this, but I actually had a magic roller laying around that I bought a while ago, hadn't really used it yet, and decided that I wanted this building to be covered in magic runes. You could totally just hand draw these in, or ignore this step altogether if you wanted to. I did want to leave these little lion heads that were part of the original structure exposed, just because I thought they added a really cool feature that you don't normally get from a handcrafted building. Deciding that I wanted this building to have some windows, I took the case of that foam roller and used it to cut through the clay and make some circular windows. You could use anything you want, though, to achieve the same effect. Once the clay dried, there was a little bit of cracking, but honestly, I thought it looked really cool, so instead of filling that in with like a drywall putty, I decided to keep it. So I couldn't decide for a very long time what I wanted to do with this roof, but in the end, I decided I thought it would look cool if there was some kind of like a tarp or a cloth or some kind of a large sheet over the top of it instead of a standard roof material. So for this, I resorted to doing a paper mache style effect, which you'll see later on is going to look cool. Honestly, at this point in the build, I was very skeptical of how things would turn out, but was pleasantly surprised in the end. Skeptically, I was looking at what I made and still felt like something was missing. I felt like there wasn't a lot happening. So I decided to take some dowels, cut them down, and use them to make some support posts. First, just so that the front of the building looked like it had a little bit more going on, but then also I wanted some additional height. I'm going to add some more of that paper mache over the top to create a second tarp, which I thought really, really completed the look and gave it that height and that final look I was trying to achieve. I wanted my windows to have a bit more going on, so I took a couple toothpicks, cut them down just eyeballing it, and then put them in there with some tacky glue to create a window frame. Still not being satisfied and feeling like this building didn't look magical enough, I have had this flower thing laying around for years. It was part of a centerpiece for a housewarming party that I had for the first house that we bought like 5 or 6 years ago, and I finally found a use for it. I'm going to glue it to this building to create something cool to look at from the back. So let's get on to the painting. I showed you some foam-safe acrylic spray paint earlier, and this is where it's going to come in handy. I'm also going to be using a gray and then a white to add some zenithal effects. Next, we are going to need a lot of paintbrushes and a lot of paint. I'm going to experiment on this building with some contrast paints, though this can get really expensive. You definitely don't have to do what I'm doing here, and you can just use some standard acrylics. After using the foam-safe black spray paint over that door in the front where the XPS foam was, I just used standard spray paint to go across the entire building and paint it black. Then, I took a gray and then a white to create some zenithal highlighting effects, which you can see right here. Oh, sorry, I meant here. I'm going to use some snakebite leather to paint the wood on this building, as well as some agaros dunes for the higher points to blend it in and create some differences between the light and the dark. Again, if you don't want to use contrast paints, you definitely don't have to, and you could get away with doing like a burnt umber acrylic, doing that over the top of all of this, and then dry brushing with a lighter brown to give it the highlighting effect you'd like. I'm going to use some skeleton horde to paint the majority of this building. This is where that zenithal highlighting really comes into play and just shines through with these contrast paints. You could also get away with a watered down khaki if you didn't want to use a contrast paint. Now, I was looking at it and thinking the building looked a little too earth tony, so I decided to take some pink and put that up at the top and create a little bit of a gradient effect, and I think it just made the building look more magical. I'm using some water here to just help that pink flow down into the skeleton horde and just blend them together. In some of the spots where I think it looks a little bit too sharp, I'm going to go back and revisit it with some skeleton horde because I want that gradient to be smooth all the way around. I decided I wanted the tarps on top of this building to be blue. I used a light and a dark contrast paint with the idea that I was going to use the light for the highlights and the dark for the recesses, but once I started painting, I quickly changed my mind and decided I wanted to do a tie-dye effect. I wanted it to look a little bit more aquatic. So the method that I used going into it is not what I ended up doing, and you really don't need contrast paint to do this. I will say they did blend well together and that made it a little easier, but truthfully you could get away with a lot of different kinds of paint to achieve this same effect. I wanted the windows to look like there was some glowing light, so I'm going to paint the base of them orange here. I called it a night at this point, so I only painted one of the windows, and I'll get around to the other one later. I'm including some Agrax Earthshade at the bottom of the building here too, just to enhance that gradient. I'm going to paint these lion heads and that big flower in the back gold. I tried experimenting with the cheap acrylic metallic I got at the hobby store, immediately hated it and switched over to a Citadel paint. Just to keep things consistent, I'm going to paint the metallic parts of the door with the same gold. Let's paint the stones around the door gray. I'm going to stick with the contrast paints just because that's what I've been doing and use the Basilicanum gray, but you could totally get away with using a pewter gray and doing some dry brushing later on. Here, I'm using a wildwood, or basically a very dark brown, to do the framing of the window. This was a bit of an experiment, but I decided I wanted the recesses and those runes to really shine through, so I took a brown wash over the building. I used some Agrax Earthshade over the gold here, but I'm going to go back and use a sepia later on because I just think the sepia shades gold better than the Agrax does. It's dry brushing time. I'm going to take a khaki or an antique white, I think here I used antique white, and I'm just going to dry brush over that entire building to really raise the highlights and make those runes stand out. We're going to do the same thing now with a white and do it a little bit lighter and just in a downward motion. We're going to use this pink here in a couple different ways. First, we're going to dry brush over the pink parts of the build, just like we did with the beige parts of the build, but I'm also going to use it as a wash to really highlight some of those recesses with the runes and make them almost look like they're glowing a little bit. And then finally, use it purely across the top to really make the top of it look pink and enhance the gradient. Here's that sepia shade I mentioned earlier for the gold parts of the building. Looking at the roof, I felt it was still missing something, so what I decided to do is take a light gold and just take a thin paintbrush and take it all the way around the edges of the tarp to give it a gold trim. I felt that that really tied in with the rest of the gold in the building and made it look a bit more rich and magical. Finally, I'm just going to go around the rest of this building to do a little bit of edge highlighting as well as some dry brushing. Speaking of dry brushing, this is where I'm going to go back and make those windows look like they have a glowing light effect in them. I got my hand in the way for a lot of these shots, so you can't see me doing the work, but you're at least going to see what the finished effect looks like. And now we're on to the final details. Here's some silver chain I picked up from the hobby store thinking it might come in handy for some crafting, as well as some resin to create glass for the windows, some super glue, and then also some white paint that we're going to use to tint that glass. So my idea for the silver chain was this. Let's hook it up to the support beams in the front just to make the front of the building have a bit more to look at and make everything look a bit more magical. I did backtrack a bit here and add some black wash to the bottom of the build one more time just to enhance that gradient a little bit more, and I used a bit of water to blend it in. Since I already had the black wash out, I decided to take it around all the other recesses of the building, so the lion heads, behind this flower, and then around the door frame. When you do this, it just really enhances the three-dimensional effect of the highlighting you've already done. I wanted the windows on this building to look like they had some glass, so I experimented with a little bit of a resin with a drop of white paint, stirred it together, and then used a dropper to put it in the different sections of the window. I let those dry. It took 2 days to do this step because I had to tilt it on one side and then the other, but the finished product looked great. And that was the entire process. I just took a piece of old junk, said, what could I turn this into? Made a lot of it up as I went and ended up with this final product, which honestly, halfway through making it, I wasn't super sure I was gonna make something good, but I love the way this turned out. And whether this is like a magic shop or some reclusive, wizard, fae, whatever, I just think it's a very cool, unique looking building. And I'm happy with the way it turned out. Can't wait to get it on the table, and I would love to see what you guys come up with too. So until next time, please like the video if you guys did like it, just so that other people can find it too. That really helps me out. And then if you want to see more projects that I put out in the future, obviously subscribe, and I look forward to making new things for you guys soon. So until then, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.